Hello, my name is Ian Watson, and I am a Director Emeritus of the American Membrane Technology Association, or AMTA. The interview you're about to see is the 23rd in a series of what we call Chats with the Pioneers. AMTA is a technical association that's founded on the advocacy of membrane technology for use in a variety of water treatment applications, from wastewater reuse and reclamation to seawater desalination. The heart of this technology is the membrane itself. About 2.5 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago now, our board of directors decided that it would be a significant project to try and record some of the history of this technology in the form of these chats with the pioneers. AMTA is making segments of these interviews available on its website so that you, the participants, can view them, and also they're available to the young engineers and technologists so they can understand the work that went into the development of this technology, which has assisted in water treatment and clean water supplies throughout the world. The interview you're about to see is the 23rd in a series of what we call Chats with the Pioneers. And with me today I have 4 gentlemen who started a company called Film Tech, which probably changed the future of the membrane industry, certainly for the betterment of the users everywhere. On my right is Eugene Erickson. Next to him is Roy Larson. Next to him is Bob Peterson. And to my far right is Harlan Jacob. Now, these 4 gentlemen started a company called Film Tech and went into the membrane business, as I understand it, against some good advice from somebody who was already in the business. And I'd like to start with Eugene, if you could give us a little bit about your background, education, and so on.
My background was chemical engineering at the University of Minnesota, 1944. And from there, did what many people did. They went work for local companies, worked for a flour milling company, worked for a little while at 3M. Had an opportunity to go back to school to get a graduate degree. Went to North Carolina State, a PhD in chemical engineering. From there to Idaho Falls operation of the Atomic Energy Commission, and worked for Phillips Petroleum. From there, had the opportunity to join a startup research institute called the North Star Research and Development. To start with, it became North Star Research. It was a small company, and we began to get interested in polymer problems, but it was an operation looking at membranes for separation of salt from salt water. But it was a contract with the Office of Saline Water at that time that the very early work was started. Some of the key people in the early studies we had Dr. Peter Francis was one, Dr. Lee Rosell. Eventually, this worked out to developed into water desalting membrane. People involved, those that I mentioned, but also a key person in this whole operation was John Cadet. Bob Peterson became responsible for the North Star work in this area. I guess further information on that and the eventual formation of Film Tech, which was formed with the knowledge of the North Star, and by this time the North Star had become a branch of Midwest Research Institute of Kansas City. We suggested to MRI, Midwest Research, that they pursue the desalting membrane line and develop commercial membranes. MRI decided they did not want to pursue that themselves. They felt that that was not within their scope of operation. So I think they welcomed our forming Film Tech to further develop the membrane technology. And the people that you have here were key people in the startup of that company. That was started, we were incorporated on my birthday in 1977.
On your birthday?
On my birthday.
Huh.
We had we negotiated a contract for a laboratory building. I think nobody had any money. I think those were really the key things that happened at the startup point.
Good. Good. So Roy, how about you?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys in your group for having us here to consider us pioneers in RO. It's a great honor. And one of the pioneers is missing. It's John Cadet.
Yeah.
I'm just so sorry that he couldn't be with us today, because thanks to John and Bob, they developed these membranes and did all of the hard gut work that was needed to make a successful membrane company. My background is a little unusual, and when you look at it, one would think I'm the most unlikely person in the world to start a membrane company. I got a degree in aeronautical engineering from the University of Minnesota in 1953. At the same time, I was in ROTC, so I was made a second lieutenant in the reserve of the U.S. Air Force. In 1954, I went on active duty, and my main job was as instructor of aircraft maintenance officers. So every day I was lecturing on jet engines and reciprocating engines and propellers. And the unique thing about this, although at the time I wasn't sure just how great this experience was, the students were all officers well in rank above me, including colonel. And in the Air Force situation, when you're an instructor, you're considered the ranking man in the room. So I learned a lot about tact. How could a second lieutenant, wet behind the ears, deal with colonels with many years of experience? So I really appreciated that. And then they put us through an accelerated instructor training school, which I still am pleased that I did, because they gave us, in a period of months, the training that someone gets who's going to be a teacher in the grade schools and high schools. So they taught us how to teach, how to lecture, how to be before a group of people. At the time, I didn't realize that this was going to help me later. When I got out of the Air Force, I went to work at the University of Minnesota Rosemont Aeronautical Laboratories doing aerospace research, which is about as far from RO as you can get. Re-entry, working on re-entry vehicles, and I had contracts with the U.S. Air Force and NASA Space Flight Center working on the missiles, the launch missiles. So I was still far away from reverse osmosis, that's for sure. When the institute closed down, I went to work for General Mills in research in Minneapolis and did research for the government on clothing that was designed to protect the soldier against a heat pulse from a thermonuclear energy release. Again, pretty far away from RO. Then Litton acquired us, and in 1965, things started getting a little slow there, so I applied at North Star Research Institute, and Gene was gracious enough to hire me. One of the best things in my life. And I really appreciated the friendships, and I appreciate these three guys who are here with me. We work together. And I guess I picked up reverse osmosis by osmosis, because I discussed this with Bob and John and the other people working on membrane development, and I said, this sounds kind of interesting. And luckily, thanks to God, I was a quick study. So I started studying about reverse osmosis, starting from zero, knowing nothing, to, I learned quite a bit. Although in my early years of representing North Star, I had to give lectures, and I knew that 90% of the people in the audience knew more than I did. But I couldn't present that fact. I had to present the fact that I had all the answers. And I just had enough cockiness to do that, enough confidence. But we formed the company, and Gene and I, one day at lunch, said, looks like there's a future in reverse osmosis. The industry has started. What's needed is a membrane. The techniques for making modules are there. The market is there. The OEM structure is great. There are qualified people making and selling systems. That maybe we should form a company based on the experience that Gene had, not me, to develop a membrane that could propel the company into its excellent position that it now enjoys. So one day after lunch in September, Gene and I said, let's start this, let's take the bull by the horns. So we left jobs that were very secure. We were both directors then at the time at the Institute, and we went in and resigned with no job in hand, nothing. And we formed FilmTech, as Gene mentioned. We incorporated in September 15th, 1977, and we personally signed for 5,000 square feet of space in a building in Minnetonka, Minnesota. And it was a very lonely feeling, I'll tell you, to walk in there to see nothing except us and our confidence that we could do something. We didn't know for sure what, but we knew then that Bob and John were going to join us. We were smart enough to talk to them and get their agreement to join us, which they did, and it was a great thing. So we heard that a hospital in Minneapolis was closing down. They were tearing it down, so we went in, and Gene and I worked. It was unheated, it was cold. It was in November and December of '79, and got a bunch of lab benches knowing that we had to have something ready for Bob and John to come. And we did that. We tore it all down and brought it back, and then I worked on getting the laboratory assembled while Gene handled all of the administration and management, because he was very good at this, very senior, and I was very happy to get my feet wet and get the lab ready. And there were many interesting times the first few years that I still recall, and one of the greatest, I'll mention, I don't want to talk too long, take time away from Bob and the others, but I used to go in the hall and see John there every day, and I jokingly would ask him, have you invented any new membranes lately? And he'd say, no, I'm working on it, nothing. And one day in March, I said, John, have you invented a new membrane? He said, Roy, I think I may have invented a pretty good membrane. And that turned out to be the FT30, the standard of the industry, and it's still well thought of. And that's when that started. And it was just, it's been one good thing after another happened. The company always had enough money. Like God was watching after us. We raised enough money, and we were able to attract people. At one time in '85, I think we had probably cornered the best talent in reverse osmosis development and marketing in the world. We had Bob Riley with us, Mel Manson in Washington. We had David Pirakawa. We had David Walker in England. We really built up a very good sales and marketing team, which was the key, because we wanted to approach the RO industry on a worldwide basis. So we set up offices in the UK, we set up offices in Switzerland, we set up a relationship with a company in Japan called Senko, and that was one of the best things we ever did with Carmen Kawamura. He was a self-taught man, but he was positively brilliant. And he opened up the Japanese market for us. Without that, I don't know if we could have done it, because if you've dealt with Japanese, they can speak English, but they want to speak Japanese to you. And so they'd ask, I'd make a presentation, and they would ask Mr. Kawamura questions in Japanese. He would talk to me to interpret, and then give them an answer. I later found out that he knows so much about RO that he was giving half the answers on his own. And I thought I was the smarty pants in the room. So that was a wonderful experience, and pretty soon our reputation got to be quite good. And at one time, I think we had either hired as consultants or employees the bulk of the old Roga group, including Bob Riley and Dave Pirakawa and Bob Flint and a whole bunch of others.
And Rick Leeson worked for you for a while, didn't he?
Who?
Rick Leeson?
He may have been in the San Diego office. We were getting so big then, I didn't know all of the people in the different. I know Mel Manson was in our Washington office.
And Walt Barnes.
Walt Barnes was there. But it was really interesting to have all these people who could help us. We weren't trying to steal ideas. These people had already left Roga, and they were available as consultants. So I said, let's hire them. And Gene and I discussed this and said, let's not try to reinvent rolling elements. That's existing technology. Let's work on building a good reverse osmosis membrane that would be the standard of the industry. So that's what we did. So it's been a wonderful time, wonderful experience. And I made a statement about 20 years ago at a paper I presented. I think it was called From Startup to Acquisition, A Case History of Film Tech. And I made a statement in there. I said, it's unlikely that another startup membrane company will follow along, that will follow in film tech's footprints, because it's now in the hands of large companies like GE, Roga, Dow, and I think that's been true. To my knowledge, there's not been another startup that's done that.
Bob?
My name is Bob Peterson, and thank you for inviting us and myself here. I've got a PhD in chemistry from Penn State, but I'm originally from Oregon, and I wanted to get back to Oregon. And the closest job to Oregon that I could line up was in Minnesota at 3M Company. So I started there working in adhesives. I wasn't sure whether, after a year, whether this was a good fit. So I put a resume on file, and a fellow named Pete Francis saw it and saw he was working at North Star Research Institute. He saw that I lived 9 blocks away. So that makes for a cheap interview trip. He called me and asked me in. I came in and liked what I saw and took a job at North Star. That was the fall of 1966. I worked there for 11 years on various government-sponsored projects, primarily in hemodialysis membranes, blood oxygenator membranes, and reverse osmosis. In 1977, I was getting wanderlust, wanted to do something differently, wanted to get out of contract research, because if you don't have a contract, your working life is maybe only another 6 months, then you're out. So we were always writing proposals, lining up contracts, and it was a little worrisome, because what are you going to do next year? So in 1977, we thought, well, let's start a company, and let's go after reverse osmosis, because we know that field. We know it from the research end. The government would take what we would develop at North Star, and then they would carry it to another company like Gulf General Atomic, Roga, and have them commercialize it. We thought, I think we can do this. So we started a company really on essentially no money, no experience at manufacturing, but with a lot of zeal. Roy and Gene started. I think they incorporated on Eugene's birthday. Then 1 month later, I went over there to see our new facility. They were sitting on wooden crates. They didn't even have office furniture, but they were off to get some equipment out of the hospital that was being torn down. John Cadott and I joined it on January 1st, 1978, which is interesting because that's New Year's Day, and we didn't actually show up for work that day. We showed up the next work day after that. John came up with this new membrane, FT30, 3 months later, and we ran with it. We originally thought to perfect some of the membranes we worked on at North Star, but our emphasis changed quickly. I had John Cadott was primarily the laboratory investigator. I had primarily responsibility of take what he developed and try to manufacture membranes from that. We had a 1 foot wide pilot plant that he operated, and we actually made membranes on it, made elements from those, and for the first couple of years our commercial products were only 1 foot long, but we were selling them. Roy was selling them, and I and a couple of guys in the back room were making them.
Good combination.
And Harlan Jacobs was raking in the cash, but not nearly as fast as it was going out. Those first few years, it was kind of amazing that the money was always there, but it was a long way from making a few commercial membranes 1 foot long to being, fully at it with a full width commercial factory. But we made the change. We made it.
Now, did you have some research contracts during that period as well?
Yes, not because I wanted to.
No, out of necessity.
Out of necessity, we wrote some contract proposals to the government and got them funded. In fact, over the space of several years, I think I wrote 10 different research proposals. Every one got approved for funding. So we had a good reputation. We did good work. And it did help cover overhead. I specifically wanted to join Film Tech to get away from doing that, and ended up doing it for several years anyway.
Good.
I left in 1991, about 6 years after Dow Chemical had acquired Film Tech. And I've gone on to doing patent work, doing some consulting, working as a volunteer tutor for high school students, and a variety of activities.
Good. Good.
Could I add one point?
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
going to be out of turn here, but Bob is very modest and won't say this, but for the first 2 years, he and John's research efforts and their success in getting contracts supported half of the company. Half was on equity funding, half was on research funding. And without that research funding, we might have floundered.
Yep.
Roy, could I ask you to refresh everybody's memory? You only had the 12-inch wide membrane, and it was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of you came up with the idea, why not stitch it together side by side, and then you had the 36-inch
Yeah,
membrane?
we'll get into that. We already learned about that in the earlier session, so we'll get into that. So, Harlan, how about you?
Well, it was my good fortune to meet these gentlemen. I'll be grateful for the rest of my life that they invited me to join them. I was a 30-year-old, the financial equivalent of a buck private, and I was raring to become the CFO of a company that was really going to go somewhere. And I met Mr. Haggerty from Norwest Venture Capital, and they had just put some money in the company about 6 months before that, and they'd also gone public. Everyone knew they were at an inflection point. And that inflection point was where they were on the verge of strong commercialization. They felt they needed a controller or treasurer on board, and I was fortunate enough to be able to interview and then get the job. It was a life-changing experience for me. I thank these gentlemen for their confidence, and I also have learned many things from them, and it was a great thing. Many of the people that I talk to now that I'm involved with helping other companies after the Film Tech experience, I tell them about how 4 guys left a research institute, took $25,000 apiece out of their pockets and started a company. And they're too modest to tell this, so I'll mention it. It's also a statistically significant case in terms of return on investment. I met the people that they brought in early on in the first stage. These people made 100 to 1 on their investment in 8 years. And I, other than a few .coms, I don't know where you can do that too often. So my hat's off to them for having created not only a wonderful work environment, but for commercializing a significant reverse osmosis membrane technology. It changed the world. They changed my life, and I'm grateful to be here. And it's really the 4 of them, and I was the guy that helped count the numbers and keep the books balanced. And when you have time, I'll tell you about a story from John Cadotte at the pizza parlor, but we can wait on that.
We'll do that later. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the membrane development. It's my understanding that John and you, Bob, developed the FT30 from one of the membranes that you had developed at North Star, or were working on at North Star. It's the NS300. Is that true?
Not exactly. NS300 was a piperazine membrane, and there were a couple of versions. One could soften water, but it was not a true desalination membrane. And then a tighter version could desalt water and make drinking water, but the flux of that membrane just wasn't that good. The FT30 was really honestly made the first time at Film Tech. When we started Film Tech, we did not have that membrane in mind. It didn't have any laboratory data. So it was brand new at Film Tech. It eventually became government property because of a contract provision in John Cadotte's employment contract with Midwest Research Institute. North Star was part of Midwest at the time we left. Right. And any invention that he made in 6 months leaving MRI was MRI property.
Ah, okay.
So eventually the Film Tech FT30 membrane or versions of it are available to anybody to make.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember that period of litigation. And there were some strange membranes that arrived on the market by your competition who was trying to avoid patent infringement.
Yes.
And I worked on a couple of projects that used some of those, and they weren't really that great. You said you had lunch with Gene one day, Roy, and you and Gene discussed what you were going to do about it, and then like, a couple hours later you resigned, or did it take a couple of days to resign?
Hours.
Hours?
We got to know one another real well at North Star, and we trusted one another. And we had given thought to this for some time, for several months, but at that lunch we said, it's now or never. Let's do it now. We were both decisive people, so we said, let's do it, because if we don't do it now, we may never do it. It'll be too late. So we went and resigned right after lunch. Scary time. It was a scary. I formed other companies, but I always had something in my pocket, funding or something or other. But we had no funding, nothing, and we did it with faith that things would work out.
Yeah. Well, when you and Gene made that decision, did you have in mind, and either one of you can answer the question, or both if you like, did you have in mind any kind of corporate structure, or what you were going to do, or how you were going to make membranes, or
Well,
did you
Gene
just
can
say,
add-
this is a good deal, let's go?
Gene can add to this, but when we first formed it, our idea was to just make membrane and sell it to element rollers. But we realized then that a certain amount of vertical integration was really smart. I'm glad we didn't do that. But that was our first intent. Would you agree, Bob? And we said, let's sell membrane. And we said, no, when you've got the main component of something, why sell it? Vertically integrate. And as I was mentioning to Doug, at a little later in history, like in 84, 85, we were thinking of buying Peter Darby's company, which was not openly on sale, but we knew Pete real well. He knew us. We trusted one another. And we gave serious thought to further vertical integration. But in some ways, I'm glad that we didn't, because I always thought that do one thing and do it well. Don't try to do a lot of things. Gene, you might want to comment.
One of the things that we needed to do was to be able to pay ourselves a little salary while we were working on the product development. We were familiar with the government office supporting this kind of research, and we felt that we could work with the government in further development of a product along the line that our North Star people had been working. We felt that in the first year we really needed a government contractor too, in order to just exist. I can recall arguing with the government contract officer who didn't understand why we had any overhead. Finally, our contact with the government office told the contract officer there, said, for heaven's sakes, sign the contract with them and let them get it going. So the first year we were in existence, we had a positive cash flow.
Oh.
And I think it's the first company I've heard of that made a profit the first year of operation. It wasn't much profit, but with what we could do with the government contract.
When you're at North Star, we learned from an earlier interview, you were casting membrane, but it was pretty small, and you used cells for testing the membrane. But you never actually rolled anything at North Star. So you go over to this building where Roy and Gene are sitting on crates, and this old hospital furniture is there. How did you come up with a casting machine?
Well, I'll just address that initially, and Bob too. We knew that the paper industry had many years of experience in working with sheets. We also had, I'm very thankful that we had good consultants who had worked at UOP and elsewhere, so we learned a lot there. And after a lot of thinking and wringing our hands, and with advice from the consultants, Bob and John and I guess several of us pitched in and came up with a 1 foot wide machine, because we needed sheet membrane to make this work. I want to just add one tidbit that you may want to edit out, but an old gray-beard venture capitalist told me once, you never can have too much money when you're starting a company. And I mean, Harlan probably knows who this was, because unexpected things happen, things are slower than they can be, so try to get as much money as you can, because you might run short. And there are many cases of entrepreneurs who formed companies, but they spent all their time worrying about the payroll and paying bills that they didn't spend any time on developing the technology. So Gene and I, very early in the game, decided that we'd rather be a small part of something that succeeds rather than a large part of something that maybe fails later. So we were able to attract 8 other investors and even investors later because they could see that we had not leveraged our positions into something that was only favoring us. And I think that still is one part of our success, that people trusted us and saw that we weren't ripping people off, that we didn't take a disproportionate share of the monies that were raised. So that's why, like Gene says, we were profitable fairly early, although we didn't start manufacturing until 1980. And it's just been one thing after another, that as if someone were watching over us, things would happen that made the company go. And it's still going. I don't know what their sales are now. We're not privy to this, but when I left in '87, the sales were 22 million. Someone told me some years ago the sales were 500 million membranes, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Because Dow brought in a lot of engineers that were good on making equipment of that type. I know they've made a lot of advancements in the element rolling and sheet formation, way beyond where we were.
Yeah, I read an article recently that there's a projection that in 10 years the worldwide market for membranes, not just RO but also ultrafiltration and microfiltration membranes, will be something like $20 billion, which is pretty incredible.
That is.
Yeah, you're right. When I started my consulting business, I didn't make any money the first year, but my wife did. She made a salary, so that was okay.
Gene is too modest to say, but he was on the cover of Inc. magazine, and when we started production in 1980 through '84, we were listed as one of the fastest growing companies in the country, and Gene's picture was on the cover.
Oh, congratulations, Gene.
I give credit to Gene, actually, and his wife, Grace, for coming up with the, well, we were one day, again, you may want to edit this out, but one night the 3 of us were there because Grace was the system janitor, too. She'd clean the washrooms and all of these things. What a gracious lady. And we were thinking of names for the company and names for the membrane. And one of us bright guys said, how about thin film technologies? And Gene said, no, I don't like that. How about film technologies? Then I don't know who said it, whether it was Grace or Gene, but they said, let's call it film tech. And then as far as the membrane, John said in one a newsletter that since Gene was the oldest, he could name it, and he wanted to call it the FT3000. But that was too big of a number. And pretty soon it got down to FT300. But then we said, in the newspaper business, that's the 3-0 mark for tonight, means this is the ultimate. So we called it FT30. I thought it's a little tidbit that someone might want to hear.
Well, that's exactly why you're here, for those tidbits. So how long was it before, how long was it after you started up before you produced your first 40-inch long membrane?
Ooh, Bob?
I guess I don't know the exact time any longer, but it would be probably late 1980, probably 81.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All we could make at that time was 12-inch wide membrane, but I figured out a way in which we could butt splice the membrane, and if we butt splice 4 of them, we could make something of a 40-inch length element. So I sat down with Ralph Forrester and we designed a machine to actually do this, and went into production of 40-inch long elements that way.
Yeah, we put them into modules that we got from Darby so that no one saw what was in the inside.
Well,
didn't we?
Well, it was butt splicer. You wouldn't know,
Yeah.
except that there was a slight hump, 3 slight humps.
Yeah, we heard earlier that this machine involved razor blades, and people would be running to the bathroom dripping blood periodically.
See, Harlan brought
It wasn't
something.
that bad.
That's something that's interesting, and I forget which year it was, but DuPont was making hollow fiber elements that looked just like this.
Yeah, right. Remember
And
that.
they ran into trouble. I'm not sure what the problem was. I never did learn the truth, but I said, wait a minute. There might be a market for us to make these and spiral wound them, put coating on them, and use a spiral wound element. They had to run at low recoveries, but it worked fine. The rejection was great.
Yeah.
So this helped our sales go with the little thing that we made.
Didn't you also at one time make a 10-inch diameter membrane to replace the B9 bundle in a DuPont shell? Or was that later on after Dow took
That was
over?
after we left.
Yeah. That
Didn't
didn't
Bob
work.
was still
I
there.
know we were making 8.5-inch elements to compete with hydronautics.
Yeah. Well, that's what you put in Sanibel. Replace
Yeah.
the old hydronautics membranes in Sanibel. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, was there a big market for you in like the under the sink business? And
I made contact with Culligan, who was the leader in home drinking water, and we made some elements for them to test very early in the game. And they soon became one of our bigger tap water customers. They were used all over, on a private label basis, used all over the world. They have new sources of supply now. But another tidbit I have, in the first year that we were formed, we met with Culligan, and they offered to buy us for $1 million. And we very quickly said no. I'm glad we did. But they saw potential in us. And we said, no, we think we can do better than that in the long run. So they remained as a customer.
yeah.
But tap water business was great for us. Our membrane really worked out very well for that. And it had enough chloride resistance. Bob, you're the expert on this, but it was used in home drinking water. We had charcoal filters ahead of it, but I've had some that I've installed at home that have not replaced the charcoal filters, and they last for 8 years. I still have some membranes running. So they seem to last forever. Another tidbit, if you got time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Edit these all out. We were working with some companies in England. I think it was Westgarth or another one, and it was during the Falkland War. And we had sent some elements over there to be tested, some seawater elements, and they worked out real well. And I was over there on a business trip, and I was getting ready to go home. I was at the airport, getting ready to go on a plane, and got a rush message from them saying, we want to talk to you. So they explained the situation, that they had to replace the desalination systems on the ships going over there. Could we get some elements to them? And I said, well, we'll try. We did. So our elements were used successfully in a wartime basis for the Falkland War, which I found very interesting.
One of the things I wanted to compliment the team on that made my job easier as the financial officer was, Roy had mentioned that there was sort of a providence. I think somebody was looking over us, and it always seemed that a very opportune opportunity would come at the right time. Maybe you could get these gentlemen to talk a little bit about the license to De Dansk Suikerfabrikker. For me, that was one of the best data points that I could use whenever I was in front of the Boston Society of Security Analysts explaining the quarterly earnings per share, whether they were up or down, which I had to do from time to time. And those data points were, some people talk about a single data point trend line. That license with DDS, De Dansk Suikerfabrikker, was a reputation maker in the financial community. And maybe these gentlemen can give you a little background on that one.
Well, at the IDEA meeting in Nice, France, I was talking before, I think it was in 79 or late 78.
Probably in 80, I think.
Yeah, it was the first time the FT30 membrane was introduced to the desalination committee. I wanted to verify myself that this membrane was doing what was being said, so I thought, well, I'm an amateur at this. So they gave me the membranes, and I tested them myself, took the data, and just to be sure that this, not that I didn't trust these fellows, they're the most trustworthy people in the world, but I wanted to do it to say that I did it. So we had these little elements that I was testing, and I could see the results were astounding. They were really good. We were getting 98.6 rejection on simulated seawater, or very close to it. And so I presented this data, and at the meeting, it so happened, again, Providence, Dr. Madsen, the Director of Research for DDS, and Harlan's one of the few guys that knows how to say De Danske Sukkerfabriker. And that's not an easy thing to say. The Danish Sugar Company was there. And Gene and I went over there a year later and signed a contract with them, and this brought in an initial investment, and they exercised an option to get more money later, and they were one of our better customers. They were using our membrane actually in their plate and frame units.
Right.
So that was one exception where we did sell some sheet membrane, but plate and frame was different than spiral on elements.
Right.
And it was a decision that the team thoughtfully made. Sometimes people will say that's an attractive horse and they'll start riding off in the direction, but the gentlemen did their strategic planning and tactical planning and realized that that was an area in which they could probably never become successful if they were vertically integrated, and it was a logical decision, a good business decision, to license it to one of the world's best plate and frame companies. And
right.
so not only was it good for the company, but it sure made my life easier to be able to explain what film tech was to the ordinary money person on Wall Street. And it might sound a bit sappy to say, but as a financial guy, it was great to be out in the world knowing that everybody at the office I could trust. Because not every CFO can trust every member of his management team. These guys were clean as a hound's tooth, rock solid, probably didn't even take a pencil home from work kind of guys. So whatever they told me, I could go with the confidence and talk to the financial community without any, I could always sleep at night based on what these guys would tell me.
That's great. That's great. It's one of the developments you made, which certainly changed the face of water treatment in the state of Florida, was the NF membrane. I used to have a friend, George Dacey, who worked for Infilco, and he had made a livelihood selling Infilco's lime softening equipment in Florida. And after about 2 years of losing jobs to membrane plants, most of which had the NF membrane in them, he said, you know, how can I beat this? I said, well, you can persuade Infilco to go into the municipal membrane market. And so he tried, and they never would bite. So poor old George, I didn't feel that sorry for him because he'd made a pretty good living, but he lost a lot of sales to nanofiltration. How did you come up with the idea for a nanofiltration membrane? I mean, you did some work early on with a membrane that had softening properties, but
Well,
what
Bob
made you
will-
think it was commercial?
Well, we had enough contact with the industry and talking to people that there was a place for such a membrane. And often people use their membranes that failed on salt rejection and call it nanofiltration. But Bob and John actually worked on developing a membrane that had good flux and in salt rejection and high flow. And I'm not positive, and I can't, but I think we coined the term nanofiltration.
Yes, you did.
I can't
I'm
prove
pretty
that,
sure
but I
you
remember
did.
a meeting. Tom Stern was there, and Bob and a few others, and we said, well, this is not reverse osmosis, it's not ultrafiltration, it's nano, because we knew that nano was 10 to the minus 9. It was particles that were larger than for reverse osmosis. Do you remember that, Bob?
I do. I was sitting with Tom Stern talking about the problem. We had tried the term hybrid RO because it was somewhere in between ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis. In our Japanese contact, Kawamura said, that does not translate well into Japanese. So I had suggested to Tom Stern that we're talking about something with a pore size of around 10 angstroms or 1 nanometer. Nano's got a nice reputation in the industry here of nano-grade solvents. Let's call this a nano-type membrane.
Right.
And so we end up with the term nanofiltration.
Yeah.
It was really a perfect word for other reasons. The industry needed a term like that. So it went far beyond just film tech naming something NF. Nanofiltration today is a household word in the membrane industry.
Yeah, I think the earliest plants that we had in Florida, I think I'm right in saying, were actually hydrolyzed CA membranes, and they called it membrane softening.
Yeah. They're loose, loose.
But I was at a meeting, I think in Fort Lauderdale, and Dave Furcar was there, and Paul Culler, and they mentioned, it was the first time I'd ever heard the word nanofiltration, so I'm pretty sure that you were the originators of that. So. You mentioned, Roy, that initially you thought about making and selling flat sheet, and then it appeared that vertical integration had some importance in the industry if you were going to make it. Did you ever think about becoming an OEM?
No, very early in the game, we decided that we didn't want to vertically integrate that far, and our target market worldwide was OEMs. We're OEMs.
Right.
So if we were to do that, we'd be competing with our customer base. So it was one of the rules that we kind of loosely developed over the years is don't compete with your OEMs. Service them and help them. And it never really crossed our mind to integrate beyond maybe the pressure vessels, because pressure vessel manufacturers were not our customer base, but we decided not to do that. So
well, that's why Hydronautics and eventually Fluid Systems, both of them became simply membrane suppliers. I mean, when I went to work for Hydronautics, it was Hydronautics Water Systems, and we sold whole plants. And but nobody else was buying our membranes, so
we made the right choice.
You made the right choice, yeah. So now you're set up, you're making membranes, you're publicly traded with all the headaches that brings to the CFO, and you had licensed DDS at least, and you also licensed another company, I
Patterson
think.
Candy.
Patterson
PCI.
Candy, that's right, in the UK. Did you make membranes for anybody else that they slapped their, like Culligan, for instance,
Culligan
they slapped their own name on them?
Culligan was Osmonics.
Osmonics.
I hate to. Is Dean Spot still alive?
Yes, he is.
Dean, you did well, but we happened to have the best membrane at the time, and Dean was a very good businessman, and we made membrane for him. I was talking to Scott Freeman the other day, who was. He's now, is he with Brown and Root in Kansas City?
Black and Veatch.
Yeah. Well, he was in our marketing group, and what a wonderful guy. He was telling me a story about, we kept this a big secret from everyone, and someone asked him in the meeting, is the osmotic membrane the best that there is? And he said, no. That's all he didn't want to say anymore, but at that time they were selling our membranes.
Well, I think that happened to another couple of companies that I won't mention, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do to fill an order.
Well, as long as it didn't compete with us, like Millipore. We sold elements to Millipore too.
Right. Here you are. You started a very successful membrane business based on what you may have considered, from now and again, a rash decision made over lunch at North Star. If you had to do it again, would you do it again? Gene?
I think so. It was something that just with the level of experience that we had, and it was something that we weren't smart enough to realize what thin ice we were treading on. and so it was just the right time for us. Why? It just it fulfilled a need that we had to be active and make something.
Yeah, it must have been very satisfying for you. Very satisfying. Roy, you came from the aerospace industry into the RO industry.
I was uniquely qualified to start up a membrane company.
Yes, you were.
All my time was spent on aerospace, re-entry missiles, booster rockets, and I was very unlikely to do this, but I'll tell you, those 10 years, the best of my life.
Yeah.
I'd do it again.
It must have been great.
Well, I wouldn't do it at my age, but if you could suddenly do a magic number, put me back into the 40s. Although, if I would know what I know now, I would say it'd be very difficult to duplicate what Film Tech did.
Yeah.
Because you're competing against the big guys. You're competing against Dow and DuPont.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's
So I
much-
guess for that part, I would not start the membrane company again. But if everything else could be magically put back to 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I would.
Bob, you left North Star, and because you were tired of writing proposals, and you started
That's
writing
right.
proposals again.
Yes, I did. Would I do it again? Probably. I know too much today to be so rash, but at that time, we were in the right place with the right technology. If I were in that situation again, I'd make the same decision.
Good. And Harlan,
I just wish I could have joined them earlier.
you had a good time, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
I wish I could have been there at
Yeah.
the very beginning.
Yeah, that's great. Well,
I have another little tidbit.
yeah, go ahead.
When I was working at the University of Minnesota, they were closing down the research labs back in early 60s, in 59, 60. And I sent my resume all around the place, and lo and behold, I got a job offer from Roga. And I often wonder, what would have happened if I'd gone there? It wouldn't have been as nice a turnout as it has been here. Although Roga was a good company, the people there were outstanding. It just shows that decisions in life can have far-reaching consequences.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. It's been extremely enjoyable for me. And as you know, Roy, I was one of your early supporters with our little test unit down in Sanibel Island
That's right.
many years ago. And it's been great for me to sit here and talk with you guys. Thanks very much for coming.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.